Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unauthorized Teacher Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is kind of going to be a part two to our last episode. I'm here with Mary Ruth's husband. I'll let him introduce himself.
Greg Vincent.
Well, thank you so much. And we said this in Mary Ruth's episode, but I just have to reiterate we are recording on his beautiful property of the Glen Isle Resort here in Bailey, Colorado. It's absolutely beautiful. Do you want to say anything about the resort?
No, it's been quite a change of careers from education to this, but it's turned out to be really rewarding in just different ways. But yeah, I love living in Colorado, and we live in just one of the coolest places in Colorado.
You really do. It's beautiful, and the history of this place is just fascinating. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So I really like to start out, I like to get a picture of where you came from, what type of educational background you have. So what year did you graduate high school?
I graduated high school in 1981, Amarillo High in Amarillo.
Oh, fellow Sandy. Blow sand blow.
Okay.
Well, did you go through public school your entire educational career?
I was actually until high school, I went to a private school.
Oh, really?
There's only 1 year in there I went to a public school, and that was first grade. But kindergarten and all other grades up to ninth grade, I attended Amarillo Christian School.
Huh.
And then my brothers did as well.
What were the biggest differences between switching from a private school to a public school?
I could just sit in public school on my hands and already was
Yeah.
way ahead of the curve. Because
Yeah.
we had small classrooms, just it was a different kind of education. But yeah, my brothers and I were way more advanced. We got to public school. And my older brothers, who were incredibly, skilled at math, they had to go to Amarillo College while they were high school students to get the level of math that they could handle
What?
because they couldn't get it in the high schools. So, but that was the big difference with that school.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it closed.
So you mentioned smaller class sizes. Do you think that that contributed to you being ahead, or was it the curriculum more so?
I think small classroom sizes, and I say small, I would say 15 students, probably one of the big classrooms there, which was different than 32 when I was teaching. And, so it was a huge difference. But I do think the curriculum, and just the structure and the strict
Right.
environment.
Right.
I mean, there was no room for horseplay in that school. So
Right.
I think that was a big deal. And in the relationships we had with the teachers and the coaches, I mean,
Mm.
it was big, and it was easier to do because it was a small school. I mean, there probably been
Right.
100 students in the whole school, maybe 120.
I want to know what teachers have inspired you the most.
There was going back to my education, that I had a teacher at Emerald High School. I never forgot her because I had a lot of problems my senior year, and it was a school wide known problem because I had a massive car wreck and got severe injuries and got knocked out of football, which is the only thing I really enjoyed about school in high school. But this teacher just, you 100% knew that she cared about me.
Mm.
And she didn't care about my grades, she didn't care about those things. I mean, she just genuinely cared about me. And I bumped into her a few years later after, and she literally ran up and hugged me. And it was just a confirmation that, or just an affirmation that she really did care and she loved me. And so, but that's my experience from teachers. That when I was teaching, I had worked with the social studies teacher at Travis Middle School. It was in 2001, and I had these big ideas how I was gonna teach, and it did not start off well. Yeah, because I was a very articulate speaker, and I had a lot of other background and skills, and I just thought, this is gonna be easy for me. It was My classroom was a nightmare, and it wasn't necessarily about classroom management, but this teacher, they sent somebody sent me up to observe her classroom, and I watched, and she had some of the wildest, notorious kids on our campus in her classroom, and they walked in the classroom out of the hallway where they're acting up and being foolish, walked in her classroom, sat down, orderly, didn't horse around, and when she went to business, I mean, she did follow-up questions, and there were these warm-up things, and then almost everything she did was hands-on. In fact, the
Mm.
taxation of that representation idea, that came from her.
Oh my gosh.
So it was her, but it was just seeing that it wasn't about classroom management. It wasn't about being 6'7" and strong and loud and being able to control an environment. That's not what it was. It was about relationship with kids
Right.
and structure. And I saw that. It completely changed how I would decided to be a teacher.
Exactly. Because I started being a teacher and I had grown up with my mom, but observing other teachers is where I learned the most. I think that aspect of being a first year teacher, going and observing your fellow teachers is really
And
important.
and with those and it was mostly female teachers because I would expected that those were the worst behaved classrooms,
Yeah.
and the most influential teachers that I had were female teachers, and what made them so influential is they took the same kids that other teachers couldn't stand, sent them to the office almost every day.
Mhm.
And these teachers, there's 2 or 3 of these teachers I worked with. Travis Middle School was tough, 1,200 middle school kids. They all lived in poverty, came from 27 countries, spoke 23 languages. It was a tough school. But you go in these teachers' classrooms and perfect behavior, never made office referrals unless something like a fight broke out or something in the classroom, they didn't have a choice, but 0 office referrals.
Wow.
And yet other teachers literally make 300,
Right.
400 office referrals a year.
Right. So this is really interesting. So we had Patrick Miller on a few weeks ago, and you worked with him, and you also were his teacher, right?
I was his 8th grade American history teacher.
Wow. And the story that he told about his taxation without representation, that came from you, correct?
If he did something a little different than it, but it probably the idea probably came, and he would have had another benefit of Miss Jameson who taught me that.
Mm.
He worked with her too.
Wow.
She was still at the school when I returned as an administrator, and so she was there, and he would have had her in 6th grade, and so that's probably where he would have got because she was one of his mentors,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, we were taught by that. I mean, I learned what he learned, I learned from the same person, so
Wow. Well, shout out to Miss Jameson. We're gonna have to have you on the podcast because you're certainly a legend around here. And what made you want to become a teacher?
so that's not a real encouraging story. I was working on the farm with my family and my brothers, and it exploded one day into really kind of just a difficult situation,
Mhm.
and I grabbed all my stuff and got in my vehicle and drove away and said, "I'm not gonna do this," and I was talking to my wife, on the phone, and she called the school district and just to see if I could be a substitute teacher to find something because I was a licensed chemical dependency counselor and I had a practice still. And she was like, this should be a substitute teacher. Then you can go back doing practicing counseling. Well, the school district, after they heard with my degree in psychology and some of the other background, they asked me to come in. And when I did my interview, the guy said, you know what, I'd hire you as a teacher right now, not a substitute teacher. And I listened to it a little bit, and I just kinda thought, "Okay, I can do this for a little while."
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up teaching. It wasn't never was a life's goal of mine to become a teacher. Now I did teach in, junior college for a little while, but I'd never dreamed of going to teaching in a, middle school or high school because I did like school, but once I got into it and once I kinda smoothed out and figured out how to take my personality and my characteristics and make them work in the classroom, it was magic for me.
Yeah.
It worked great, and I mean, and I was somebody who liked stealing other people's ideas, like Miss Jameson's,
Right.
and I mean, I would go to them, and I got more and more like that the many years I taught is I would find out what teachers are really successful at stuff, and I just literally sit down and observe them, not let them tell you because I'm not auditory.
Yeah.
And, you can sit there and tell me how to do something all day long when I go try to do it. It's like
Exactly.
yet another language. But, just observing other teachers and observing effective people, and sometimes it was, observing ineffective people and learning the way I didn't wanna be or the ways not to teach and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah. Awesome. And then you eventually became a principal. What made you wanna go down that track?
so we had 5 kids at home and, just a lot of stuff going on, and part of me wanting to be an administrator was the level of administrators at my school at Travis Middle School, because without naming names, it was ridiculous.
Mhm.
I did not know how to manage kids, did not know how to manage adults. Mm, it was chaos. And I thought, I said, and they made, substantially more than I did as a teacher, and so there was 2 reasons. One is I thought I could do better than my examples of administrators, and the other is I could use the extra income. And I'll just quit and say this now is it was the worst mistake of my life because being a teacher, I got to work with all kids, good kids, difficult kids, struggling kids, but I got to work with all of them. When I became an administrator, I was dealing with the 5% of the knuckleheads that took the life and joy out of the other 95% of the kids that got to enjoy when I was in the classroom. And I did like the administration stuff. I liked being creative. I liked coming up with ways to manage one of those really difficult schools, and I got really good at it. But it wasn't as rewarding as being a teacher.
That's really inspiring to hear, how rewarding your teaching really could be. And how long were you an administrator?
For 10 of the 15 years I was in education.
Wow.
I was, for I guess for 8 of those, I was, an assistant principal or an associate principal for some of it, and then I became a principal in New Mexico.
Mm. And when you were teaching, what did you teach?
American history.
American
Yeah,
history.
American history 1, which would have been colonial exploration, colonialism, and then took the Civil War.
Yeah, I believe they stop at Reconstruction.
The Civil War and then Reconstruction was kind of the final thing. Yeah, this is the final part of our curriculum.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I did a study on Huckleberry Finn, which was written during Reconstruction. And well, she was the president of the school that I was going to at Southwestern University. She was a Mark Twain scholar, and she came and she'd been studying Mark Twain her whole life. And she came in and was telling us because we were all just disappointed with the end of the book. I don't know if you know the ending of Huckleberry Finn is notoriously disappointing. And she said, um, why do you think it was disappointing? Because we were all talking about how disappointed we were. She said, "Why do you think you're disappointed?" And one of the girls in the class said, "Well, I think he was just tired of writing." And I'm like, "Mark Twain is not tired of writing, no." She's her theory, and now this is just a theory, but she thought that Mark Twain deliberately made the ending of the book disappointing because he was disappointed with how Reconstruction went. It
What
was
surprised me,
just an interesting tidbit.
he was very vocal about all that, so he wrote a lot of literature about it outside of that book, so,
Well, I'm wondering, what is the biggest difference between when you went to school and when you worked in school?
quality discipline.
Discipline.
And the things that we're allowed to do, and I mean, when I was growing up in school, I mean, it was nothing to get swats and to get some type of corporal punishment in athletics, and they didn't hold back.
Yeah,
And not saying that was good,
right.
but then you get to schools that have, like that management, that administration of the school I was at. I mean, it was just, if you're not going to enforce things and you create an orderly, safe environment, you're going to have chaos. And I never remember any kind of chaos in the private school I went to, for
Really?
sure.
Yeah.
And, I remember my first signs of chaos is when I left the private school and went to Tascosa for my sophomore year, and then I went to Emerald High my junior year. But, just the chaos, and, there was lots of fights, there was lots of busing, a lot of busing back then because it was the reintegration, that period in the late '70s where they were still busing kids who didn't wanna be at that school, and I was fortunate because I played basketball. So, I got along with the kids with the kids, African American kids that other kids were not getting along with, and there were
Right.
big, huge racial fights at that school, and I never seen anything like that. I've been raised in a very quiet, protected, family my entire life. I never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
But that school was, in a lot of ways, were just constant chaos. The hallways are always chaos. One of the first things I tackled when I had to take over a very difficult school was to get control of the hallways, and everybody thought we were crazy. So we got control of the hallways, and the control in the hallways goes right into the classroom.
Can I ask you what was your strategy in trying to control the hallways?
So, but when I was at Travis, the actual second time, I worked with Dr. West, and we had a great team of administrators, and the fights were always in the hallways. The bullying was horrific in the hallways, and just teachers would not come out in the hallway no matter what you wanted them to do. And I don't blame them. It was scary. I'm 6'7". I mean, kids didn't bother me in the hallway, but I mean, a lot of our teachers were half my size, and We did some really peculiar things out there. We put stanchions all down our hallways.
Stanchions?
Stanchions, like if you're in a line, like at Disney World or at the bank, and that has the ribbons between them. We put stanchions, or about 20, 25 feet long sections down the hallways, and the teachers, we did require teachers to get out in the hallways, but their job was just walk on the right side, and do not cross the stanchions. I mean, you have to, so when you go out the door, you just have to turn right and go. And if you're gonna turn and go the other way, you had to go to the end of the stanchion, turn and go back. It had almost an instant effect.
Wow.
And it's odd because we shared that with a lot of people, and not it's difficult to start things like that, but we did it, and we were just stayed with it constantly, and I mean, within no time at all, I mean, the kids liked it because the kids actually like structure, and they
Yeah.
responded well to the structure. But that was just one of the many things we did there, because there were so many kids at that school. But just turning and loose into a hallway, I mean, it was because that school had 400 fights the year before I went there,
Wow.
had 350 my first year there, had 120 the last year.
Wow.
I mean, that's just, but you gotta look at the problem, and then you gotta come up, be creative, and do stuff like that. Just
Good.
can't be, "Well, this is the way it's always been." You can't do anything about it.
Exactly, exactly. I remember at Crockett Middle School, we didn't have stanchions, but they had tape down the middle of the hallways, and they made us walk on the right side.
That's where the
That
idea came from, the tape.
that's where I learned how to drive, It was nothing getting behind the wheel when a couple years later when I was 16, because I knew how to merge and get into the traffic and
So
everything.
we took the tape idea and we tried it. It didn't work
Yeah,
just because it was too far gone, and so
yeah.
after the stanchions where there's an actual barrier.
That's how it was at my school. We did the tape, and it was just like, and then they said, "Teachers stand in the middle." Well, I'll be honest, I stopped standing out in the hall because there was one day we had 3 fights before 9 a.m., and we called for help, like, 3 or 4 times, and nobody ever came. And I said, I can't be in the middle of that. It's a safety issue." And it broke my heart because I had students coming up to me scared, and I was like, "Just come stay in my classroom, and I'll write a note to your teacher, or you can go a minute after the bell," or whatever, but the chaos, you're absolutely right with that. And once you're there, it's too far gone, you know?
Yeah, and Dr. West had a lot of connections around the state, and with Teach Like a Champion or No Excuse University, that stuff that Doug Curry and Dr. West were involved in. So they had these great contacts with people at other schools who had had similar, demographics, similar problems, but they were just some of the most amazing police. They were so, it was kind of a combination of a lot of us getting to travel around and see what other schools are doing, and just come up with other ideas. It goes back to teaching.
Yeah.
If they've got something that's worked, steal it.
Hey, it's
Take it
not
for you. I
stealing.
know.
It
It should
it borrowing, and that's how education should be working,
borrow.
One of my favorite websites as a teacher was Teachers Pay Teachers. I love the idea that I was supporting other teachers, but I also was getting the material, just helping each other. That's what it's all about.
Mhm.
Well, I wanna know, what was a time when you felt particularly successful in your career?
I would say in teaching, kids who had never passed at the time it was tax test, and,
Mhm.
I would say kids who had never passed any tests, and other teachers or adults would say they won't pass the test, and seeing those test scores come back and just rocket,
Yeah.
and know that I got to facilitate that and participate in it. And seeing some of my scores rally against some of the schools who historically had some of the top scores around, and to get my kids who didn't, you know, in some people's perspective, don't have a chance, but
Mm.
be able to get those kids interested. And I mean, every now and then I talk to these kids as adults now, and they'll say, "Hey, do you remember this lesson you taught, or do you remember the posters we made in your classroom?" And just things that we did in there at the time. I didn't think it was that significant, but here it is 15, 20 years later, and it's still significant to them.
Yep.
So you hear things like that. I think the test scores as an administrator, I would say it's Travis Middle School, because that was not too many people want to work at Travis Middle School.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that I loved it there. And it's not just because of me, it's because of Dr. West and the other administrators, Miss Robinson and Mr. Garcia and Miss Hutchinson, some of these others. It was such a great team. And there was these big problems, and we get together and we just went and fixed them.
Yeah.
And certain things that people would say is impossible to do, we made it possible. And when I left there, I went to a charter school of 65 kids. I'd have left that charter school of 65 kids and go back to work at Travis any day. It
Wow.
was more enjoyable to work. And
Yeah.
so I think I think at Travis Middle School, those years there as an administrator, just all the organization and all the structure and all the stuff that we put in there, I always felt really good about that.
Fantastic. Well, that was the biggest difference between going between a public school and a charter school.
I mean, I think, the flexibility that teachers had, that they still had to follow the core curriculum, but, they had flexibility.
At the
It
charter school?
it's a charter school,
Okay.
and they had the flexibility to do that, and it was a classical education school, so they did the Paideia method, which is a kind of a Greek education method, Socratic questioning. But, I mean, that charter school, that particular one I was at, it's very unusual to go work there because the kids call all the teachers by their first name.
Mm.
They called me by my first name, and it was really a difficult transition for me. We kind of compromised, and I got the kids to call me coach. And even though I had been a coach for 10 years, but it's just with that, and then over time, they just wore me down because some of my best students who would have never done anything to offend me walk in, they call me Greg, and then they cover their mouth and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," and I hated that for them.
Yeah.
And, so I just turned it into a lesson with them. But it was, and the reason I say that is because those kids, whether this was right or wrong, the way that school was developed is these kids were in charge of, they had equal representation and equal participation in running the school.
Okay.
Now, I had trouble with that language because when they would sit there and tell me, I mean, because I'm your equal here. And I said, You're not my equal. I mean, but that's the way this school is. I'm your equal." And I said, "I can expel you from this school. I literally can expel you. I literally can send you home today. I literally can change your classroom and get on my computer. We're not equals." And I said, "I'm not trying to say I'm superior or anything else, but I have earned a position and I've been granted a position of authority." And I
Right.
said, and so, but but that whole concept was not all bad because these kids felt like they had an investment and they had in that school, and they were able to make decisions with teachers. They were able to question everything, which was really hard to do, like get questioned from kids. That's not,
Right.
but it created conversations. And it was really small classrooms. Most classrooms averaged about 8, 9, 10 kids
Wow.
in those classrooms. There's only 65 kids in that high school. And but it was the I think that was the big difference in the high school, in the public schools. Not in all of them, but I mean, I literally had a principal that, that I worked with for some time that, when somebody said, "You know what I mean? So you're expecting me to teach for the test." And his response was, "You're damn right I am." And she said, "Well, I'm just don't agree with teaching to the test." And he said, "What are you being evaluated on? What are your kids being evaluated on? What's your classroom being evaluated on? The test." And so he said, "Why are you not teaching to take the test?" And as much respect as I had for that administrator, for that principal, I was always disgusted by that
You
because that is what the district expected. That's what the state of Texas expected. They could have cared less about anything else. It's those test scores, the test scores, the test scores. And when we were at that charter school, that year I was there, that was the first time those kids had ever been tested because of what I told you about. It was just they were doing some odd things to avoid the No Child Left Behind Act. And I forced it on them, and the teachers fought me the whole way about taking those tests. But the reason they fought me is I'm not teaching these kids to take tests. We're not going down that road. And my response was, I said, "I never asked you to do that." I said, "I'm telling you, if you teach the kids the way you're teaching these kids are going to be fine on that test. Do not stress them out about the test." And because when it comes to graduating, I have 100% authority on who graduates. And I said, I mean, in the state of the state of New Mexico allowed that. I mean, not entirely, but they got their first year of testing done, and they fought me pretty much all the way up to it. And then we got it over with, and test scores came back, and every teacher was going, "Oh my gosh, look at this! Oh my gosh, look at this! Oh my gosh, they did great! They did great! Oh, this is where I'm weak in. Oh, this is where I can work on teaching better."
Yeah.
And they loved the testing results all of a sudden. and they did not have to teach anybody to take that test. Never, not one time did I walk into a classroom and saying, "Yeah, you could be tested on this. You could be tested on this. You could be let's go through this and just memorize, memorize, memorize,
Right.
memorize." And I've watched so many years of that. Some teachers couldn't do anything but teach kids just rote memory, and in that school, and nobody, not one single teacher did it. And like I said, that school was one of the top ranked schools in New Mexico and the nation. They were the top ranking schools in the nation at getting into whatever the college test was. And so
ATs?
ACTs, I'm sorry, yeah, it was ACTs, yes. So that was a big difference with that. And those teachers were allowed to teach the way they like to teach and take the core curriculum and make it interesting and have some fun with it. Not just take the core curriculum. Okay, this is what we got to do today.
That's really interesting because 'cause I've had some teachers get on this podcast and say, testing is ruining our education, but, it's necessary. It's necessary for that evaluation, it's necessary for that data. I kinda wonder where that line is.
And I completely agree with that. And I remember when all this came along, and it just started mushrooming after the No Child Left Behind. And actually, it started in Texas, prior to that. And then when George Bush became president, became No Child Left Behind in the federal level. But I would say this: you really can't evaluate what you're doing or what the learning levels are without some type of testing. And the problem for so long is that testing was left up to the teacher. And so you would have some teachers, whether it's a majority or the minority of some teachers are testing to very high level abilities. Then you have other teachers just want to make sure you get to play in the basketball game Friday night. And that's the problem. And literally that graduating kids who are illiterate and all these other things, and that had a lot to do with athletics. That's what pushed the testing through.
There was no
Yeah,
standardization.
we were socially promoting kids.
Right.
Been going on for years. Now, is it all kids? No. But I mean, some kids who cared about their education were going to get educated no matter where they were at.
Right.
But as the education system grew and the school systems grew, and honestly, because the bureaucracy grew, it got to where you have teachers that are just, and I mean, that's the way you evaluated. I mean, I remember my test at that private school, that stuff was tough.
Yeah.
I mean, it was tough, and I remember some of the first tests I had it when I did Tascosa. I mean, I'm looking at this test going, "Are you serious?" I mean, it literally looked like an elementary school test. I mean, but that's what they had kinda gotten to,
Right.
and so that's where I see the standardized testing coming into effect. Now, what I wished if I had, if I had a magic wand, I think it should be at school district level.
Okay.
I don't think you leave it up to every individual there should be standards for teachers, but there should be some flexibility, but it should be confined to the school districts because just for instance, Amarillo demographics and Amarillo's testing and Amarillo population is completely different from where I was at in Angel Fire. We had a population of 10,000 people and they weren't even full time because it's a ski resort town. But they should have been able to come up with take the core curriculum, compared to other districts and be able to create some type of standardized testing, which is acceptable to your school. And that some things that met federal, standardized across the country. Like there's certain math that, most kids should be able to, there's certain science concepts, American history, the civil action, civil duties. There's certain things that every kid should have. And then outside of that, I think districts and small school districts and systems should have some flexibility and some input in how that curriculum is designed. Not just what's good for one is good for all.
Exactly. That was something I struggled with as a teacher is my students were not to the level that the test was testing at, and my heart just, sank because I was like, "How am I gonna get them to this level?"
You're fixing to give them a test, and some of them are 3, 4 grade levels behind in reading levels
Yeah.
and math levels.
And
Especially if they came here as some of the refugees or, kids who,
yeah,
we had kids at Travis that got dropped off at school, but by their social workers and by the system that brought them here, and it brought them into Amarillo in the city, and they're put right in the curriculum. And if the testing came up 3 months later, they'd take the test. And
exactly.
so they still were just trying to learn basic English.
Exactly.
And so yeah, every kid, there should be some flexibility for lots of kids. And I mean, if they're not on the level or there's language barriers, I just think it would probably be more complicated to do that, but I mean, like Amarillo alone, you're paying millions and millions of dollars for people to sit in offices at the Education Service Center and never lay eyes on a kid.
Exactly.
And instead of, putting that amount of money into the schools, to the schools, to the teachers, and to have curriculum coordinators who are actually responsible for coordinating and creating your curriculum that works, not
Right.
coordinating the curriculum that's been handed to me and say, you will teach this and you cannot step out of this. You have to do this. And
Exactly.
be like, that's not right for bond. Like you went to Crockett. So Crockett kids are tested the same way that our kids were tested at Travis. And like I said, big portion of our population, came from other
Right.
countries, 29 countries, huge refugee school. And we had a lot of migrants, legal and illegal. I mean, large amounts of migrants at that school. And they're being tested exactly the way the kids at Crockett and Bonham Middle School are being tested.
Right.
And it was frustrating.
Well, and something you mentioned a little bit earlier was the agency of the teachers, I think is really important because when I first started teaching, they handed me a script and I got my wrist slapped because the first week of school, I put in my own PowerPoint about reading and how Gen Alpha has the lowest literacy rates. And I wanted to talk about it with my kids. And we had a really, really fruitful conversation about how media is different from, our grandparents' generation to our generation and how people get their news and everything and phones and things like this. But I got off my script. And I was like, well, I was talking to these kids about reading and now they want to go read a book, And I felt like I had no room. I know what these kids need, but I have the district coming in every week to check and make sure I'm doing the right thing. But I think that that's really interesting what you said about trusting the teachers to teach and then just taking the test.
And if the teachers can't teach and they're not doing well, then there needs to be a system to get rid of them. I mean, to get them out and get on to some other career that they'll be good at or happy at, because that was one of the things that I saw is, and it happens with administrators too. Um, you just move them around. You move them around or put them in some other situation, and the school systems and the unions just had it to where you could not get ineffective teachers out of a classroom. I mean, unless you do it the first year, but the yoke is really the easiest way to do it's the first year, probationary year.
Yeah.
Great, most of them retain their jobs. And because the administrators, first off, didn't have the guts or the willingness to get in there and help them become great teachers. And then second of all, they didn't have the guts to face them and do something about it at the end of that first year. And I've watched it for 15 years. And, we'll have a better year next year. It's your kids. These kids have one shot at this. And it's like, well, maybe this teacher will get it next year.
Right.
That was incredibly frustrating as an assistant principal, not being in charge of that. And I don't know if I'd have been any better at it because it's a difficult system, and I understand that. But to me, that should have been happening more. But anyways, that was where I was going with that.
Or kind of to my favorite part of the podcast, I want to know about your funniest student stories.
Funny student stories. I think one of the funniest things with kids though that I would ever participate in. One of the things we did at Travis Middle School was a talent show, but it was not students; it was the teachers,
That's so
and
fun.
the talent was not. It was mistaken talent. I mean, I mean, we made mockeries of ourselves, and kids just ate it up. I mean, we sang, we had American Idol, skits, and I was Simon Cowell in one of them. I was perfect for that, and how I say I was, but that was probably one of the funnier things that I ever got to participate in school. And the kids, it just I mean, the kids were just so shocked and amazed that teachers were because they got to see teachers in a completely different perspective. Even their most serious teachers would get up on the stage and they would do this kind of just off the wall act or something. And anyways, that was one of just thinking of funny memories, not necessarily that's about kids, but that's probably one of the funnest thing I ever did with kids.
That is so fun. I wouldn't have thought to do that, but that is so fun, and it shows the kids that you don't always have to be so serious too.
And that was the purpose of it.
I love it.
And it was just fun for us.
Yeah.
It was fun for us doing all that, and you know what? You'd have to deal with misbehavior in the audience. The kids were glued to it because they were just because we put on some shocking talent shows. And I think kids are like, "Holy crap, did they really just do that? Did he really just say that?" And we weren't offensive, but I mean, borderline.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's so fun. Well, good for you for putting that on. Is there anything that you would like to say to your students?
I think that a lot of people try to put into kids' heads what they'll be good at when they get older, what you should be or what you should do. And I would always encourage students, to start. If you see somebody's got a career that really fascinates you, then start exploring it and talk to people in that career and look at the education involved and look at what 20 years in that career could get you. And once you get to college, because you picked a career choice, at the very beginning, and this you're hearing this from a guy who had probably 9, 10, 11 different college, choices when I was in college. Because I mean, I went from architecture to animal health technology, veterinarian, business, accounting, and then landed in psychology. And then from psychology, I went on to professional counseling and in school administration and stuff. That was a massive benefit to me, having all those different, career choices and, in college direction I wanted to take. I'm glad I did every single one of them. Like I left one out, nursing school. I did everything but the practicum, and I took anatomy and physiology. And it was one of the most difficult classes I ever took in my entire college, even with my 2 master's degrees. But, that anatomy physiology has stuck with me, forever, and it allowed me when I started studying abnormal psychology and doing my graduate work, when we started talking about the brain functions and the synapses and, and all these different things, that most people would say, "Well, what's a synapse?" I mean, I know what a synapse is. I learned it in anatomy and physiology, and even when I gave the commencement speech at the high school I was at last, because even though I left in the middle of the year, the kids got to pick who their speaker was for their graduation, and they had me to come back to the school. This is after we were up here at Glen Isle Resort, and so I went back down there, and that was part of my speeches. I said, "I'm just going to tell you right now. I mean, and I don't want to offend any parents here, but I said." Just because somebody told you to do this or just because you signed into this thing, if some point in time you don't feel like you're going to be happy in this career or this college choice, I mean, or this, the direction choice you are, it's okay to investigate something else and go make a career and a life of something you're going to enjoy and be happy at. And don't get stuck in something because somebody told you. I mean, because if I would have been stuck at what my family kind of expected, I'd be an engineer.
Yeah.
I'd have been an engineer because that's me. My dad was a self-taught engineer. My brothers were Texas A&M engineers. And that was just kind of I went a different direction, wanted to do architecture, and I never did that. I don't think I'd ever been happy being an engineer. I would never been happy sitting there, at a computer or sitting, this was before computers and we were looking at it. It's just not my thing. It's just like right now. I mean, the last thing in this world I'd ever want to do is go sit back in an office or sit in front of a computer again. I mean, I get to work with my hands and feet every day, all day long.
Right.
And I have 2 master's degrees, and that have just kind of gone away because I've chosen to live in the mountains and be a mountain man. And
Well, but you do so much here. I'm sure it all
I'll tell you where I'll tell you where all my background, everything I did is it affects me with customer service. I mean, and Mary Ruth's just natural at it, but Mary Ruth and I can solve almost any difficult situation with a guest or somebody on our property. And, where other people throw their hands up and say, well, then leave if you don't like it. I would say probably on 95 to 99% success rate where people are happy when they left here, even though despite, situations they didn't
right.
like when they got here. And so I think all my training in counseling and working in schools as administrator, dealing with difficult people, I mean, all that education and everything I did it helps me in the customer service. Not too much that helps me with my hands and the kind of that physical work I do, but, this business is, I mean, we're 100% customer service
Yeah.
and our reviews show it.
Yeah.
And if we had this attitude of, well, I mean, if you don't like it, then leave, then you'd read that in our reviews, and that's not what you read here.
No,
So
absolutely. Just before we go, is there anything you'd like to say to your teachers?
with teachers, I would say this, don't get so stuck in your head that you know what's best, and it's okay to listen to kids and to read the classroom and to learn from other teachers and to be humble and always be, and it's a kind of a catchphrase. It's used a whole lot, but it's, be a lifelong learner. And we teach the kids that to be lifelong learners all the time. Well, if we're teaching on that, then are we being lifelong? And does that mean I'm always studying books? It's like I told you, I mean, I didn't get that much out of studying books. I got more out of discussing those things and debating my professors and writing things down and researching things. And, but what we say that phrase to kids a lot, but then we're not life. I would say a lot of times we're not lifelong learners. We
Yeah.
think we are, but I mean, learning means getting your hands on, getting your hands dirty,
Mm.
getting out there, and sometimes it means failing and then coming back and fixing it and making it better.
Yeah.
But I mean, I literally watched teachers teach the same way they had always taught for many years. And if I was working with new teachers, I would tell them two different things. Go see the teachers that have what you want. Make sure you're observing them and learning from them, and spend equal amount of time, going and observing teachers that don't necessarily have what you want.
Yeah.
And because that is a huge learning thing, because if you watch things that teachers say in classrooms that, that's not a great classroom, and you look and then watch the kids. You
Mhm.
watch the kids' faces, watch the good kids who are acting right, and look at the looks on their faces. I mean, it's just, that's big. And I'm glad I got to do some of that. I got into a lot of it accidentally. That was probably my biggest learning, experience is getting to run with and start observing teachers. And honestly, a principal suggested I do it. One of the principals that I at the time suggested I do that because I got a my voice in here is one thing, but I mean my yelling voice, I mean I can rattle windows.
Yeah.
And when we're played at Dick Bibbins Stadium, you could hear me in the top stands. It was loud. It's the same way I started out teaching.
Yeah.
It's the same way I tried to get in control of my classroom. And the louder I would yell, guess what the kids did?
The worse they would.
The worse they got. I literally picked up one of those big teacher desks one day, just straight up and dropped it 1 foot onto the floor.
Wow.
Actually, I say that, it's a story I'm gonna tell you because I've never forgotten this.
Hmm.
I picked up that desk and dropped it on the floor, and prior to me doing that, I'd blown my coach's whistle, which is a Fox 40 whistle, and make you cover your ears. I've already done that. And the bell rang, and all the kids went out. It was my lunch, and the teacher next door, her name was Miss Strigley, Karina Strigley, and, she walked over to my classroom and said, "Greg, can I help you?" And I'm looking at her, real kinda, attractive, short, not a big, just, presence, and I mean, what can you do to help me? I mean, do you see and they were giving me difficult kids because it's kinda like, I bet they won't mess with Vincent,
Yeah.
and it was a bad thing to do to a brand new teacher. But, she would just say, I heard that noise. I mean, it sounded like furniture, and anyways, I started telling them all this, and anyways, she said, she goes, "You know what, Rick?" She goes, "Do you realize that I have" 'cause she taught math, I taught history, but we're in a portable. She goes, "Do you realize I have most of the same students you do because they're in my groups?"
Mhm.
And I thought, "Okay." And she goes, "Do you ever heard me yell? You ever heard me scream, slam doors?" And, "No." And, she said, "I'm just telling you, there's a better way to manage a classroom." And that was kind of the beginning for me, and I didn't completely agree with her at first because I was kind of embarrassed.
Yeah.
But, over time, and I would say, that moment where she told me, it doesn't have to be this way, Greg." I don't remember ever observing her classroom or, just seeing a whole lot of that in there, but, that was had a profound effect on me. It's like, "Wait a minute, how is it that she never yells?
Yeah.
How is it that those kids love her classroom?" And because I was trying to manage them with fear,
Right.
and a lot of these kids grew up in fear,
Yeah.
and they'll fight back. And so that was but anyways, that was just something I had that just dawned on me as one of the worst things I did as a teacher is just lose control and scream and yell, and it got to a point as a teacher that I never screamed or yelled anymore. And even today, as an administrator, I didn't scream and yell unless I was having to deal with a difficult situation I had to break up really quick. And, but as an administrator, I mean, stay calm and find a way to do it. When we had to deal with crisis situations in schools, like a thing break out in the classroom, you had to go deal with it. A lot of people think, you run to that classroom, bust in the door and break it up. About 20, 30 feet before we get that door, me and all my administrators would stop. And you learn this from EMTs and people who get firefighters. You ever see them running up to cars? They're just kind of walking because they're walking and thinking and processing what if, what if, what if. And then you walk in the door and just kinda calmly walk over, and, it's easy for me to break a fight up with one hand, just, and, walk in the classroom calmly and the situation calms really quick. If I busted in the door and knocked desks out of the way and went and started throwing kids apart, I mean, you could literally start another fight.
Exactly.
And so anyways, that was, but that's what I would, yeah, it goes back to what you asked to tell new teachers. Whatever you do, go into it calmly and just put a lot of thought into everything you do and always get your kids' perspectives on everything. Let your kids tell you what they think about the classroom. You may not like it,
Yeah.
and that's okay because then you can say, well, what would you like? Then you have to set boundaries, but give kids input because they're not most of those kids those kids may not pass test scores. They're not done.
They're not dumb.
They're not done at all.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for everything that you shared with us. This was a wonderful episode.
Absolutely, Reagan. Thank you for letting me do that with you.
Of course, of course. All right. Well, this has been the Unauthorized Teacher Podcast. Please be sure to give us a 5-star review on Spotify and YouTube. It really helps boost our numbers. And be sure to follow us on everywhere: Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. It's all at the Unauthorized Teacher Podcast with no spaces. Thank you so much for listening.